So Dr. John Jaquish is here tonight with our human longevity community. We're very excited to have you here this evening. So good afternoon to our human longevity community. And as you know, at Human Longevity, we like to diagnose conditions early where we can make an actionable, meaningful change to improve health. One of the key areas that can easily be improved if caught early is bone density. And we know how important it is to be strong as we age. At Human Longevity, we've diagnosed many patients with low bone mass, and we develop a plan to improve their bone density. We have sent many patients to OsteoStrong, and tonight we have Dr. John Jaquish, the founder and innovator of OsteoStrong, whose commitment to osteoporosis started many years ago, over 30 years ago, with his mother who was diagnosed with osteoporosis. He studied biomedical engineering at Rushmore University and received his PhD. He has since then has over 236 patents, numerous articles in medical journals, including collaborations with NASA, and a best-selling book, Osteogenic Loading. So Dr. Jaquish, please, welcome our human longevity community and tell us about your passion with OsteoStrong. And we have seen the differences. We just wish there was one in San Francisco and more cities for all of our patients to have access to it.
There is one in Palo Alto.
Right,
and you only have to go there once a week.
Right. Los Gatos and one in the East Bay. And
right. So that was a great introduction. Thanks. One small alteration. My book Osteogenic Loading was not my best-selling book. My best-selling book is Weightlifting is a Waste of Time.
Okay.
Which covers a lot of the same material, but it focuses more on fitness as opposed to bone health. If you have the chance to read Osteogenic Loading, don't. It's very boring. It's really an adaptation of my PhD dissertation. So it's like one of those documents that's like every little potential detail that you didn't ask for and probably won't benefit you. But from a scientist's perspective, when they look at things like that, they want to know the answer to every little question, every little detail. So that's what that is. So I encourage everyone to not read that.
So tell us about OsteoStrong and tell us about your philosophy about osteoporosis, improving bone strength.
So when you and I were friends. We were hanging out when I was telling you this story, and I told you my plan, and basically started. My mother was diagnosed with osteoporosis. So she told me, she came home one day. She was very upset. She says, I've been diagnosed with osteoporosis. I have to take this kind of drug, and she gave me the pamphlet that the doctor gave her, and had the side effects in there. She says, I don't want to take this, and I said, well, I don't really blame you, but let me try and understand a little bit more about this particular dysfunction. And so the conclusion I came to was this is a disease of deconditioning. Anything that's deconditioned can become reconditioned. So I thought, okay, how do we build bone density in the first place? So, and this is where the research discussion will always start, like the laws of mechanotransduction. There's not a lot of things in medicine that are called laws, but this one they're pretty sure of, so that's why they call it that. So when you put mechanical force on bone of an appropriate dosage, so there is a dose response threshold, the bone will adapt. So you compress the bone, so end to end axial loading. So like this is the axis of a bone. So we want to load that bone from end to end. So like foam rolling on your legs or something like that. I've seen people say that that's great for osteoporosis. No, the loading's coming from the wrong direction. So that won't do anything. But when it comes to how bone is built, small children are always delivering high impact to their bone mass. So if you're ever in a house with little kids are running around and they sound like elephants, even though they weigh 40 pounds. They don't know they're doing this, but they are going through high impact events, and those high impact events are being absorbed into the bone mass, and that's what's forcing the bone mass to pull in minerals, absorb those minerals, and then assimilate those minerals into the bone matrix by building more small little walls in between those other little walls inside the bone. So the cross section of a bone looks like a honeycomb, and that honeycomb becomes more intricate and full of more mass as this process compounds over time. Very interesting, though, the remodeling of bone is at a longer rate than musculature. So primary mineralization after an impact event is between 5 and 10 days. Secondary mineralization is 60 days. So that tells you that the metabolism is much slower in bone, which is why it takes so long to build bone density. Peak bone mass is generally seen at 30 years of age for both males and females. But once you build bone, it takes about 30 years to dissipate. So the slow metabolism becomes our benefit because later in life, like let's say you're in your 50s or 60s and you build bone mass back to peak bone mass. So your 50s, 60s, you build your bone density back to the level where it was when you were 30 years old. It's going to take another 30 years for that to go back to whatever it is at that start point. So you can have the bones of a 50-year-old when you're in your 90s or past. So it gets to the point where this is one of the therapies where you can do it for 2 or 3 years to get back to a 0 T-score, which is peak bone mass. And then you might never need to worry about it for the rest of your life.
And tell us about the circuit that you have at OsteoStrong, the circuit of exercises that people do, because that really is amazing. And why do you have to just go once a week?
Sure. So, like I said, primary mineralization takes 5 to 10 days, which is why we cycle it on a weekly basis. So, you don't want to do it any more often than that. It wouldn't be productive. You got to let the bone respond and build density. And in fact, the first few sessions aren't, depending on the level of strength of the individual, they might not be initiating bone mass growth yet. But what they're doing is accessing the musculature to the point where they're making neurological changes in the musculature so that you're training the body to initiate more firing in a shorter period of time. Therefore, at some point, you get to the minimum dose response of bone growth. Now, for the hip joint, that's 4.2 multiples of body weight. So I know like a lot of questions that people have is like, well, is walking good for bone density, or I lift weights? Is that good for bone density? So a good friend of mine, his name is Matt Wenning. He currently has the world record squat. So he can squat 1,200 pounds. He puts a bar on the back of his neck and loads it up with 1,200 pounds, and he can squat that for 1 repetition. That's the world record. Except he weighs 300 pounds. So he actually does not, he's the strongest man on earth, and he does not meet the minimum threshold for triggering bone growth with that lift. So, does weightlifting work? Well, in theory, but the problem is now that we know what the proper dosage is, and this was not established by me, this was established by scientists in Bristol, United Kingdom in 2012. Once you understand that, there's only one way to get that, and that's through high impact. So gymnasts, when they do a dismount from the uneven bars, when they land, they get sometimes over 10 times their body weight. So those are the highest loading events of anything that we physically do. So the question was, and when I was like looking at my mother's problem and thinking, how am I going to solve this? I thought, okay, I'm going to build an impact emulation device. And I'm actually going to build 4 of them, one for each way we load the body and how we protect ourselves from impact. So there's one movement where your legs have a 120-degree angle of inclusion behind the knee joint. And then there's another one with the upper extremities is kind of like this, and 120-degree angle of inclusion from the lower to upper arm. And then there's one for the core and one for the spine. That same geometry shows in all those positions. So optimized positions, how we would normally absorb impact. So like in the upper extremities, I can either absorb or create the greatest amount of force at that 120-degree angle position. So once that geometry was understood, and fortunately research in gymnastics, it was really gymnastics research that made this possible because even though the movements are very dangerous and gymnasts retire at an average age of 19, they've created so much bone loading data that it becomes very obvious that if you can get that loading without that risk, that totally addresses the problem with no chance of side effects. So, unlike some of the medications that are out there. So, that was the research challenge. How do I build a machine that emulates high impact forces? And there's 4 separate devices that do that, and that's what's at OsteoStrong locations.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. What else do you want to share with our community?
Well, it depends. Like a lot of the things that we see now, OsteoStrong doesn't always talk about this or advertise this, but people that have joint pain, they usually go in for osteoporosis because they don't want to take the medications. That's when you're looking at a business, it's like what makes people show up. And it's a shame because there's other reasons that people should show up, like addressing it ahead of time before it becomes a problem. That's a huge one. Posture. There's a lot of postural changes. So the shoulders get pulled back. One of the things that really determines the visual age of a person is their posture. If someone has lousy posture, they just look older. And if someone has better posture, even if they are older, then they look younger. So that's sort of an unintended effect because you engage so much of the musculature and the trapezius muscle, which really kind of controls the shoulders and really the positioning and protection of the neck. That muscle gets incredible engagement. And when that happens, that it then sets everything in the right spot. So posture, also hemoglobin A1C control. So somebody who's pre-diabetic or diabetic, we're engaging muscle from just a neurological perspective so much more. The GLUT4 signaling goes up and it becomes very curative. So like somebody with type 2 diabetes, they can be better off in their situation if they do some kind of cardiovascular exercise or go for a walk every day. But when you engage the muscle to increase GLUT4 signaling, that's an everyday thing that doesn't stop. So it's really like getting momentum in the opposite direction from what's making somebody with metabolic dysfunction worse. All of a sudden, they keep getting better and better and better and better. And of course, if they're not eating candy all the time, then they do amazing. Yeah.
No, agreed. I mean, the muscles are, once we activate them and get them working, they're going to do what they're supposed to and be more responsive to the glucose.
Yeah.
So that's great. And then sometimes we have patients who have like degenerative disc disease, and can't do squats, right? Because they have osteoporosis of their spine and we don't want them to fracture. And I really think your program really kind of, protects from that. So can you talk a little bit about how it, the utility of that for people who have, degenerative disc disease in their spine or spinal compression fractures, and how it seems much more safe than doing squats, weighted squats than.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you have disc degeneration, that's not a death sentence. It doesn't mean you're going to need to, like fuse your spine or anything like that. Though some orthopedic surgeons might suggest that. At least it's a good billable event for them, but it might not be the best thing for you. And also, well, actually, let me stick up for them for a second. Most of them don't know about OsteoStrong. So, in essence, they're kind of right. But once they discover OsteoStrong, then they send all the patients to OsteoStrong because they see a lot of patients who are having biomechanics trouble and pain. But there's a study that came out in 1999 by Benjamin and Ralphs. And it's one of my go-to references about tendons and ligaments. Basically, by loading a joint on its axis, this is the axis of a joint. like, it's not loaded like this. It's loaded like going, load going this way. So when that happens to a joint, the joint tends to build what's called fibrocartilage in the tendons and ligaments. So don't confuse that with cartilage. Different. But it means the tendons and ligaments get thicker and more powerful and support the joint better. And it enable the muscle to be a shock absorber as it is supposed to be. But most people are a little deconditioned. So this really reconditions the musculature to fire quickly all the time. And then with the tendons and ligaments getting thicker, the joint capsule is more protective of the compromised joint. So somebody with disc degeneration and somebody who might have chronic pain, that chronic pain can disappear. We've seen chronic pain disappear in OsteoStrong users. They'll, like, let's say they're bone on bone in their knee and they can't walk up or down stairs. They have to sidestep. I'm sure there's somebody who's listening that's like, oh, yeah, that's me. Once you start this therapy, the support around the joint becomes so powerful. In about 6 months, you cut your pain in half. In another 6 months, you cut your pain in half again. So, once you have like a quarter of the pain you used to have, I see people run up and down stairs that couldn't use stairs. And they're like, yeah, I mean, I still feel it a little bit, but I can live my life now. And
So
that's
one of the
huge.
questions we have is actually about osteoporosis in the knee. So what type of thing is OsteoStrong? What exercises? What equipment are you using at OsteoStrong to kind of treat the osteoporosis in the knees?
Oh, just the lower extremity movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it looks a little like it's funny. OsteoStrong doesn't put pictures of the equipment
Mm-hmm.
online. And at first I thought, why would you, like, you have all this crazy, really cool equipment. Why would you not put that online? And I only had to think about it for about a minute. And then I talked to Tony Robbins. He's one of the driving forces behind this. And the other guys who are running it, and they said, well, we don't want people to get it confused with gym equipment because
Right.
it's very different. Your range of motion, you might only be moving 2 millimeters. And that 2 millimeters is not the machine moving, it's your bones actually being compressed. So, like, I have some stop motion photography, where they, let a camera go and it just clicks away. And you can see, like, when I do the lower extremity movement, you can see a few inches of my body just disappear and then reappear as soon as I come out of the movement. And so my femur's being compressed, my tibia, my fibula are being compressed, all those joints are being compressed, and that's what creates the stimulus.
Great.
And it also doesn't hurt because I talk about compressing bone and we're deforming bone. And I think one of the questions is like, wow, that sounds like horribly painful. Not at all. Feels great.
And do patients feel sore after it all? Do they feel sore?
Typically not. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
vegans do,
Mm-hmm.
but they're low in iron, B6, and B12,
Mm-hmm.
almost always. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah. By the way, there are 20 different published studies on veganism and bone density, and 100% of them, 20 out of 20, show that being vegan damages bone heavily, and you'll have much larger problems with osteoporosis later in life by sticking to that
And do you
nutrition.
think that's because they're missing nutrient? You mean they're missing the B12
Yeah.
or?
They're missing essential amino acids. They're missing just like quality protein. In fact, most vegetable sources of protein are only 3% to 9% usable by the body. So you got 90+% that just goes through you in form of nitrogen. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times some of the plant proteins, though, you can get complete proteins from them, and they definitely help prevent a lot of cardiovascular disease. But we're not going to talk about
go ahead.
tonight. Yeah, but
Sure.
we have another patient. Another patient's asking about how the osteostrong compares to the vibration plates for bone building.
Mm. So it's funny. I used to be one of the owners of Power Plate. So I'm very familiar with this. That's the biggest vibration plate company in the world. Um, Vibration does not do anything for bone. That started as a sort of like a talking point. Basically, they were just lying with mathematics. The idea that the plate accelerates, so the plate moves up and down 30 times per second. So if you look at the acceleration of that, you could say somebody's being put under 5 forces of gravity. So they say that's like 5 G forces because they're compounding all of those upstrokes of the plate and adding them all together. Well, but that's not how the world works. That's not how physics works. It's not how anything works. I mean, to manifest that in bone, see what really ends up happening is just the skin on the bottom of your feet absorbs that vibration, and none of that mechanical force, or very little of the mechanical force, ever even makes it into the bone, because your skin is a shock absorber itself. And so is your musculature. It's like your body's trying to protect you from violent movements. So this thing moving 30 times per second is only moving at 2 to 4 millimeters. There was a company that was really falsifying a lot of research, and they got caught doing it.
Mhm.
Um, and there's been a number of meta-analysis. There's actually a meta-analysis that explains how it doesn't do anything. There's another meta-analysis that's totally fraudulent that says it does do something to bone, but they included a bunch of studies that had been deleted for fraud. So
So our patients are asking how long, so if someone has osteopenia and they sort of begin OsteoStrong, how long will it take for them to improve if they're doing your program? And if they're, or if they're, and if they have osteoporosis, can you give us an idea?
great question. So depending on someone's level of engagement, so you're voluntarily compressing your bone. When doing that, there's a level of aggressiveness that you can have where you can be a little more shy or cautious as you're doing it. And it's just going to take a little bit longer. But like it took my mother 18 months to go from her T-score being -2, which is right at the threshold diagnosis level for osteoporosis, to 0 in 18 months. So that's pretty fast. Other people, now my mother and I had an argument every time that I put her through. Now, keep in mind, she's like patient 0, right? So the only reason anybody would have believed it was safe is because I was doing it too with her. And so, I'd do it and I'd be like, oh, okay, it's your turn. And she'd argue with me, we don't know anything about this. And I'm like, yeah, I know plenty about this. Like, there's not published research on it yet because you're the first person using it. You're lucky. But I'm still her son, and she still remembers every time I broke a window with a baseball. So, you know,
And she's
uh,
probably very grateful that her bones are much stronger now.
super grateful. In fact, she had a huge fall a couple
Hmm.
years ago. Her knee swelled up the size of a basketball. And they took her to the hospital, and they were sure she had multiple fractures. They looked at the knee, and they're like, I mean, they looked at her age. She's in her 80s. It's like, okay, she's probably never going to walk again. They did the X-ray, nothing. Like
Hmm.
absolutely nothing. The swelling took like a month to go down, and she had a bruise that lasted for a year. Like that's how much trauma there was. She fell down, like she basically missed a step and went down like the length of 5 steps right on her knee.
No,
Uh,
understandable. I mean, that's why we encourage our patients at Human Longevity to be strong. So that way, when we take those falls, that,
yeah,
we're
then
not
you
going to
just
end up
get
with
up
a
and dust
fracture.
yourself
Yeah,
off, right?
exactly. And just have a little bruise and be able to
Hmm.
recover.
Hmm.
So is there anything more that you want to share with our community while I go through some of the questions? I'll see if there are other questions. And we welcome any questions from our community, but Dr. Jaquish, please share with us any other highlights that
Sure.
you have for us.
Yeah, I'd like to hear their questions. I don't
I,
want to guess what they're going to be interested in.
yeah.
Just hear what
So I
they're
think
interested.
they said, what do you do if OsteoStrong is not available in your area, if it's too far to get to and there's no one? I know I definitely have some patients that are thinking about starting one in their area, but
That's what I was
what do
going to
you,
say. It's
yeah.
really not an expensive franchise to start. And the onus of operation is really based on the software.
Mhm.
So you don't need a physician to run a facility. There are the technicians really just need to be patient with people.
And then one patient was wondering, can they purchase the equipment at home? Is there an opportunity to purchase the equipment at home?
Yes, there is. It's expensive. It's like 300, $375,000.
Can you send us the link that way in case anybody might be?
We don't really have a link to buy something for $375,000,
Yeah.
but you can definitely contact OsteoStrong, and the
Yeah.
website is osteostrong.me.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other questions or other things that you'd like to share with us?
No, go for it. Let's get into their questions.
Yeah. So
important.
they let's see here. So they wanted to mention, suggesting it matters more about the exercise versus diet. You mentioned the protein sources, and do you feel, how do you feel the exercise versus diet plays a
Well,
role?
it's that's a debate that goes on in many different respects all over the place. The answer is nutrition is the building blocks, but the stimulus is your body deciding to use the building blocks. So
Right.
it's not one or the other. It has to be both,
Agreed.
and it will
And
never be one.
right. And I think with our patients, to your question about the amino acids, sometimes we do an amino acid analysis to make sure that they're getting enough of what they need. And we're looking at the essential vitamins for building bones, magnesium, vitamin D, and watching that, and do calcium, looking at other sources like causes like celiac disease, and making sure there's no conditions like multiple myeloma, or hyperparathyroidism. So we
Right.
do a definite workup to make sure they're getting all of those things.
Yeah.
So let's
Awesome.
see. One question is, does using the leg press machine in the gym help avoid leg osteoporosis?
So when you load up the leg press machine, it's at an angle. It's at a 45-degree angle. Most of the weight you put on that is actually going into the ground because you're pushing it at an angle. Sort of like if you can push your car uphill, does that mean you can bench press 4,000 pounds? No. It means most of the weight's going down, and all you have to do is create enough momentum to get it moving forward, which does not take nearly that amount of weight. So leg presses are a little confusing because people think they're putting a lot of weight. Really, you have to look at about 30% of that weight as real weight that's going into your bone mass. Or you don't have to do the math at all and just put a barbell on the back of your neck and see if you can squat. Now, I'm sure you don't recommend that. And by the way, barbell squats, one of the dumbest exercises. Like, hey, we have something heavy to carry. Let's stack it on the back of our neck.
Yeah.
I mean, the fitness world, like people get so upset, like trainers, all fitness world gets so upset when I say things like that, but it's like you can't defend that.
Right, of course.
Yeah, it's
So we have, we
terrible.
have, we have another question. How does the training affect hip joint? How does it affect the hip joint? And
So I didn't answer the previous
oh yeah,
question,
sorry.
but I'll be able to answer both of them. The minimum dose response is 4.2 multiples of body weight. So in a gym environment, if you are not exceeding 4 times your body weight, and remember, the world record squat guy doesn't do it, you won't do it either. You just can't get there with weights because weights are designed to move full range. And when you're moving full range, you're limited by your weaker range of motion. So when you go down in a squat and you're kind of butts touching your heels, that's the weakest point. And if you can get out of that position with, let's say 100 pounds, 200 pounds on your back, wow, that's great. Still not going to do anything for bone though. Like it'll do a lot for muscle. It'll do a lot for circulation, healthy, if you can do it, if you can do it safely, but not for bone. So the way OsteoStrong works is there's robotic arms that move you in a position where you would naturally absorb impact, and then you engage the musculature to create as much force as possible. There's a computer screen in front of you that shows you how much force you're generating, and you compete with your previous numbers every time. And for the most part, every time people beat their numbers.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. So, and then we have a question here. How old are the typical patients that go to OsteoStrong?
Great question. Depends on which location. So like the LA kind of Venice Beach location, the average age is like 40. And just because there's younger people there that are just interested in being as healthy as possible. Um, if you go to like let's see, Rancho Cordova, California, which is like Sacramento. Um, like the age is probably 65.
Mhm.
And then if you went to the ones in Albuquerque, New Mexico, it would probably be 75 or 80, average. So there's quite a few older people, even in the ninth decade of life, who are doing phenomenal.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have some questions about where can people find your book?
Amazon.
Okay.
Well, both of them are on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they could just look up your name and find it on Amazon.
Mhm. Or my website, drj.com, DOCTOR, the letter J.com. Also, I can save you some money if you want to read Osteogenic Loading. There's a free copy that's just available for download on that website. It's the bottom of my publications, the first publication I ever had.
There's a question, given that peak bone is at 30 years of age, how young should someone start OsteoStrong? Should they start it before they're diagnosed with osteopenia?
Well, that would be optimal. Unfortunately, people tend to react instead of act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like look at how many people are really fit. Is it 1% or is it 1/10 of 1%? Depends how you define really fit. And that's probably because people put it off, they don't prioritize it, and then all of a sudden they're told they're gonna have a heart attack if they don't do something about their poor condition, and then that's a wake-up call, and then they can do some things. But the problem is you want to get out in front of these things.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want
So
to
we have
wait until you're compromised because then it's more challenging. So yeah, I encourage everybody who's in their, let's say, late 40s to start using OsteoStrong. Maybe do a year, build your bone density back to where it was when you were 30, and then maybe take 5, 6 years off. Like I don't encourage people just to do this in perpetuity. You can, but you don't really need to. Like you want to build back to peak bone mass. Now, I'm over peak bone mass. I'm actually 2 standard deviations above normal. And it doesn't matter what I do. I can't seem to get it any higher than that. So ultimately, there's only so much mineral density you can hold in your bone mass. I explain it like if you have a bucket of tennis balls and you put 5 tennis balls in there and there's still room for another 20. Okay, but then when you fill it up and there's 25 balls in the bucket, you're not getting any more in the bucket.
Well, that's great. Then you're a long way away from ever getting osteoporosis as you get older. So we
Right.
have patients, that are international patients, and then they come and they may come to the U.S. and they do a week at OsteoStrong. What do you recommend when they go back home, and how often, if someone cannot get to a local OsteoStrong, how often do you recommend like the interval be, and what could they possibly do at home if there is no OsteoStrong for them?
So if you can't get to an osteostrong, like let's say you're at a place where they're just never going to have one, like you're on a military base in Alaska, um, you want to start working with a physical therapist so that you can engage in high impact activity. So everybody probably has heard of box jumping. So box jumping is great. The problem with box jumping is people jump up on the box and then step down. What they really need to be doing is stepping up on the box and then jumping down, because that is going to give you what you need. Now, as far as measurement, if you can safely, and keep in mind, like you start doing this with like a curb, 6-inch drops. So if you can hop off a curb and you can do that and maintain your balance over and over and over again, Then you look for something just slightly higher and you hop off of that and you're absorbing that force. You don't need to do this many times. In fact, there is a whole lot of research that shows one loading cycle does this. So don't worry, you don't need to spend hours jumping. You just need one relevant event. Now, I kind of hate saying that because I don't want people to go out and jump off of park benches and hurt themselves. But a park bench is actually perfect as long as it's more than 24 inches off the ground, because that's the threshold. It's like 22 and a half inches is how high you have to be to where once you receive impact from dropping from that height, you get to 4.2 multiples of body weight. Doesn't matter what you weigh.
So do you recommend that they do that a couple of times a week if they can, while they're waiting to go back to osteostrong? Because we have patients who are in Costa Rica, or we have patients all around the world.
Yeah, you want to do it a couple times, not because a couple times means anything, but you want to really make sure that you're getting the load into the bone and you're not absorbing that with the musculature. The problem is the more athletic somebody is, the less loading they get in bone because their muscles are so good at absorbing shock.
Right. And to our human longevity, I recommend that all of you talk to your human longevity physician, and I'm and I'll talk to my patients about that, and we can work together, because obviously when you're jumping, you need to make sure that you have balance.
My next thing was
that you don't fall.
You got to make sure that you're able to do this.
Right.
Because remember, basically when people turn 30, we're all told, oh, don't do high impact. You want low impact exercise. They say that for a reason. That's not a bad recommendation. It's one that'll pretty much guarantee you'll get osteoporosis, but it's also safe. So, when you're trying to embrace impact and go in that direction, you just got to be very cautious and take very small incremental steps towards that. And of course, running this all by your physician and make sure you have the biomechanics to do it.
Right. And we practice personalized medicine at Human Longevity. So we really talk to our patients about their specific conditions and what's best for them. So we have a personal question here. Everyone wants to know what kind of exercise regimen do you personally do to get your bone density 2.5 times above normal? So
that's just wrong. I've never done anything other than.
Yeah. And you've been doing it for over 30 years.
I don't know where you got that 30-year number.
Well, I think because we've known each other for a long time.
We haven't known each other 30 years. You're making
I guess it's been maybe.
That was like I remember the first time we had this conversation, we were at a bar on Geary. And it was actually the launch party for Peter Boer's fashion brand.
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
I mean, it was over. I mean, that was about 20 years ago. That was
about
at least
20 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was telling you about what, and I remember you were like, that's like near impossible. Like you're trying to change the world of medicine. And I'm like,
and here you are. You've done it. Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't easy. So your words, I heard them. I was like, yep. I know I'm going to have to really deal with some pushback. But, the pushback is healthy because physicians are bombarded with ridiculous stuff coming from, the internet, and people come in and they're like, hey, Dr. Oz said all I need to do is this and I'll never get cancer. And, the physician is just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so to get past that, I had to figure out how to communicate with the physician in a brief enough way where they would understand what I was talking about and they would still give it, whatever the 5 minutes of attention and then go, okay, that sounds like it'd actually work. I'm going to send a few patients over, and depending on how their DEXA scans look and their blood work looks, because I tell them to look more at blood work, at the P1NP and the CTX or BAP blood markers. Those are way more accurate. So they do that. They send 5 or 6 patients over, and then every time they call me or they call the center owner, and they're like, I can't believe it. This is so effective.
Yeah, no, I've seen so many patients who've been doing it and they've reversed osteoporosis just like your mother. So I think it's fantastic. And I'm so amazed and happy to see that you were able to change medicine. as we are
Totally, like,
at
this
Human
is never
Longevity.
gonna work. You're never gonna be able to convince people. And I don't like it when people tell me never, because I'm just like, well, wait a minute, I'm sure there's some way. And so that's what I had to do. Like, you kind of
Yeah.
encouraged me to really like think about, like, what do I need to do to make a physician's life easier?
Yeah. Well, you built it. You built it, and that's
Right?
what we're doing at Human Longevity. I mean, we're the only place practicing medicine, with genomics and whole body imaging,
Mhm.
and really trying to attend to problems much sooner. And we're diagnosing so many men, screening men for osteoporosis and
Yeah.
osteopenia, because in the traditional model of medicine, they're not being evaluated, but we are checking everyone who comes to our program. So we're sending men and women to your program and developing tailored plans for them. So we're changing medicine together.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah. So any final words for our community?
Oh boy. If you want to learn more now, my online presence is a little more fitness focused. So if you find me on Instagram or something like that, I talk a lot about just general fitness training or cardiovascular training, balance training. It still pertains to health, but I've got to get people interested. So there's a lot of pictures of me with my shirt off.
Well,
No,
we have one
sorry
more. We
about
have one.
that. It's not what you want to see. But
We have
it's usually an attention grabbing picture. And then the caption is something that's actionable, useful information. And then I always put the academic reference.
So there's a question. Can going to OsteoStrong replace going to the gym?
Hmm. That's a good question. Not exactly a simple answer, because it depends why you're going to the gym. If you're going to the gym to reduce body fat, no. If you're going to the gym to build musculature, and it's very important. The two greatest drivers of long life that are uncontested. This is part of the reason I don't pay much attention to nutrition research, but the outcomes, if you look at outcome research, then it cuts through all the clutter. So two greatest driving forces of long life are high levels of muscularity, low levels of body fat. So um, what OsteoStrong will do is train your body to engage more musculature. That doesn't necessarily mean making it bigger or more powerful. So it's very synergistic to what you would get out of fitness, uh, but not quite the same thing. OsteoStrong is very specific, uh, neuromuscular recruitment, bone density, uh, metabolic syndrome, anything having to do with type 2 diabetes is going to really improve your situation there. But I have a very different take. Like, I would never send anybody to a gym. There's a reason I wrote a book called Weightlifting is a Waste of Time. I don't lift weights. I am very strong.
Yeah.
So it's just that basically what I do is all band based training, but the bands that I use are 800 pound, uh, 800
Yeah.
pounds of
No.
bands.
Yeah. So I
So
just recommend everyone, to check out the OsteoStrong, and I will provide those
for sure.
links to
And
them.
if you want to sort of go down a fitness road, read the book Weightlifting is a Waste of Time.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. It was so great
Awesome.
catching up. I'm so happy. And thank you
It's
to our
good to see
Human
you. I haven't seen
Longevity.
your face in forever.
I know. And thank you to our Human Longevity community for spending their evening with us. And I'm sure you have many questions. Please contact your Human Longevity physician for personalized details and answers to your personal questions about osteoporosis and
One more
health.
thing, if there's a whole bunch of questions and you're not sure the answers, we can do this again.
Great. Great.
Yep.
Yeah. And we can send them to you and you can answer. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all.
Right. Shell,
Great to see you.
good seeing you.
Talk to you soon. Thanks. Good evening.